On the second cassette of this Bible study lecture series, Dr. Howard C. Estep will continue teaching from the book of Daniel. We now join the Friday night Bible study in the King is Coming Auditorium, Colton, California, as Dr. Estep is speaking from Daniel chapter 3.
Turn to the book of Daniel, chapter 3. I have a lesson outline for you. It's divided up into a number of parts. Number 1, a great image set up and dedicated, verses 1 through 3. 2, everybody was commanded to worship the image, verses 4 through 7. 3, Daniel's 3 friends accused, verses 8 through 12. 4, 3 Hebrew young men commanded to worship the image, verses 13 through 15. 5, their refusal and punishment. Verses, verse 3, 16 through 23, I think that is. Let me check myself a moment. I worked on this outline this morning at 1:30. 13 through 23, 5, their refusal and punishment, verses 13 through 23. 6, the king is amazed. I'm surprised he was. Verses 24 through 25. 7, the king convinced. Verses 26 through 28. And lastly, the 8th point, Nebuchadnezzar issues an official executive order, verses 29 through 30. Interesting lesson. Does anybody need a Bible? Anybody need a Bible? We can bring you a Bible real quickly if you need a copy of the Scriptures. This is Daniel chapter 3. It's an interesting lesson. Our first part, a great image set up and dedicated. It was rather interesting, and when I was looking at this 3rd chapter, King Nebuchadnezzar just had a dream in chapter 2. Now in chapter 3, he's building a great image. He had a dream in chapter 2, and what did he dream about? A great image. Seems like he's gotten in a rut. Now he's in chapter 3, so he's going to build an image. And this is verses 1 through 3. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold. It's rather interesting why he did that, an image of gold, because when Daniel interpreted the dream, you will remember he said to King Nebuchadnezzar, that thou art this head of gold. Now we find him building an image of gold, pure gold, in the 3rd chapter, verse 1, an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. This plain of Dura is not known. Nobody that we've talked to, none of the history books identify the plain of Dura. We've been to Babylon on 2 occasions, and it's south of Baghdad. And you just drive out in the desert like you're going down into Indio or even further down in the desert. You just go down into that powder, dusty, dry desert on your way to Babylon. But he built this tremendous image. He must have had it cast out of some mold, and then he overlaid it evidently out of pure gold. A tremendous thing, standing some 90 feet high. Tremendous image, standing there on the plains as you're driving down through that level country. As you get closer, and you can imagine the sun rising or setting, shining on that magnificent image, it reflected a beautiful array of light. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together, because he has to do something with this image. No point in just building it. It's like when you buy a new car. First thing you do, you get in the thing and you go to visit your aunt or your grandmother. You never park it in the garage and treat it normally. You got to plan a trip. So you got to show it off. So he builds the image. He wants to show it off. What's he going to do? Verse 2. Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. In other words, he's going to dedicate it. He's going to officially introduce it to the kingdom of Babylonia. So he brings in all of the official people connected with his reign of government. All of the little constables, the justices of peace, everybody that has anything to do with his government. And anyway, he's asked them all, come there. Verse 3. Then the princes, the governors and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. He's ready to dedicate it. And I can imagine what a magnificent sight, because Babylon was the world-renowned kingdom of the great image which Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream in the 2nd chapter, which was a world government. You can imagine who all was there. I saw movies, television films, and 16mm films of the 2500th celebration of the Persian Empire several years ago, and the following year we were there, and they still had the buildings up that they used for the 2500th anniversary of the Persian Empire. But the Persian Empire would never compare to the Babylonian Empire. And the Persian Empire buildings were fantastic. Everywhere you could see for miles. Magnificent buildings. Hotels, motels, tents, all kinds of things. Just to handle the dignitaries that came from around the world. Well, you can imagine what went on in Babylon. All of these hundreds of thousands of people had to be housed. They had to be fed. There had to be transportation for them. It must have been a fantastic conglomeration of humanity packed and jammed into that valley south of what we now call Baghdad. So he's got them there. They're all ready to dedicate the thing. We're going to dedicate it. Just what he's going to get out of dedicating this, I don't know. So we take a little further look and we see that everybody is commanded to worship the image. This is verses 4 through 7. Verse 4, then an herald cried aloud, and this herald was an employee, or these heralds were employees of the king, and these were men who announced decrees. So they had these paid men who went around and they gave a blast on the trumpet in the little townships, and they announced what the king had made or decreed in the last 30 days. And that's the way the people got their news. There was no other way of knowing it. So these heralds, they announced this thing that the king has put forth. And the herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages. So indicating a lot of people there. Come from different backgrounds, different groups, spoke different languages, etc. Verse 5, the herald continues, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music. So they must have had a fantastic orchestra. It's been said by some historians in the 5th chapter of the book of Daniel, at the feast of Belshazzar, they had a 36,000-piece orchestra. Here in the 3rd chapter, I'm made to believe they had at least that many, if not more, pieces of musical instruments. The middle of verse 5. And all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. When these musicians start to play, this will be the signal for all of these thousands of people gathered in this big plain south of Baghdad. You're to fall down and worship this golden image. Pagan worship. Pagan worship. God never intended for mankind to fall down and worship idols made out of metal or plaster of Paris or anything like that. God wants the worship. God is not pleased with any kind of worship that is given to pagan idols. God wants all the worship. So you're going to see God really manifested in this 3rd chapter. God's going to be exalted. Verse 6, and whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. All of you guys that don't fall down, we're going to throw you in a furnace. Verse 7, therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So that was the command. This is the story. This is what they're told to do. And they're frightened before they do it because the king's herald said to them, if you don't obey orders, in the furnace you go. And that's a very unpleasant situation, being tossed into the furnace. So they got the upper hand with them right there. So now we see in the 3rd part of our lesson that Daniel had 3 friends. These 3 friends, I believe, though they don't get as much publicity as Daniel got, I believe they were just as spiritual. I don't see any reason, as I've read the book of Daniel and the account of these 3 young men, I see no reason to suspect that they were less spiritual and less brave than Daniel was. I believe they loved God just as much. And they hated pagan religion and pagan practices just as much as Daniel hated it. So now we see these fellows put under the scrutinizing eye of this situation which they're going to be thrust into. This is verses 8 through 12. Daniel's 3 friends are accused because everybody else is bowing down. And it's so easy today to do that, even in our life. I hear this phrase quite frequently. People say to me, but everybody else is doing it. That doesn't mean anything. I had the occasion to go to Redlands this morning. And I have cruise control on the car I drive. I punch it in at 55, right on the button. I like to do that. I'm sort of an exacting type of fella. If you're going to have a watch, have it right on the button. I asked a certain party the other day, I said, what time it is? He said, well, I think my watch is 3 or 4 minutes off. I said, well, I'd throw the thing away. What's the use of having it if you're going to guess what time it is? So I punch in the speed at 55. Everybody passes me. And several of them give me dirty looks as they go by. One fella actually crowded me out of the lane, and he wanted to get on by. I was only making 55. Well, everybody's breaking the law. Well, does that mean I have to break the law? Because everybody else is breaking the law. Everybody else is bowing down to the image. The golden image set up on the plains of Dura, south of Baghdad, down there in the area. Ancient Babylon's located. What does it say? Looking at verse 8. Wherefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came near, and they accused the Jews. Evidently, Daniel wasn't present for some reason or other. I've talked to some good Bible students, and no one has been able to give me the reason why Daniel wasn't involved in this. But Daniel isn't involved in this. But they came to accuse certain of the Jews. In verse 8, verse 9, they spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. That's just a formal thing, you know. That's just a lot of that, you know, stuff that comes in a big roll and you slice it real thin. That's just plain old protocol baloney is all that is. They know he's not going to live forever. O king, live forever. The dummy's going to die 70, 80 years of age. He might make it to 90, but so what? O king, live forever. Verse 10, thou, O king, hast made a decree. Well, he knew that. He did it. Thou hast passed a law, or you've signed an executive order. You've made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, blah, blah, so forth, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. The king knew this. These fellas are dumbbells. They come along and tell him what he already knows. It's rather a waste of time. They could have made this chapter much shorter if they'd have gotten right down to the heart of the thing. Verse 11, and whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Yeah, I know, I said that. Verse 12, there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Now he's going to name who they are. Well, who are they? Well, they're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. They're not doing what you said. Now, king, you said that they got to fall down and worship the image. And you also said if they don't fall down, you're going to chuck them in the furnace. Now, we got 3 fellas out here aren't doing this. You know, it's a case of the other fella sticking his nose in somebody else's business. You ever notice that? Someone had an extra large nose, and I remember this story well. And they were used to poke fun at them. And this fellow who had this extra large nose, they always poking fun at him, but his stock answer was, I kept it out of other people's business and let it grow. And these dummies are sticking their noses in other people's business, and they're worrying about the Jews. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So what's going to happen? Well, we look in our 4th part, and we see that these 3 Hebrew young men are commanded to worship the image. And this begins in verse 13. So the king is going to try to exercise his authority because, you know, a law is no good if you don't enforce it. Basically, and I say this after many years of reading all kinds of literature and books and observing humanity and watching the political scene change moment by moment, law is no good if it isn't enforced. It might as well not be on the statute books. The problem with our country is we don't need more jails. We don't need more penitentiaries. We don't need more institutions. We need to enforce the laws that we now have. We don't enforce them. We're very peculiar as to who we enforce the laws with. If you've got the right amount of bucks, you can get it off easy, very easy. All you got to do is read the paper. Just read the paper carefully. I read 2 papers every day very carefully because I want to keep abreast of what's going on. I start my day in my office by reading 2 papers. I don't want to be bothered for the first hour because I want to see what's going on so I can keep abreast. The laws are not enforced in our country. If we enforced the laws, we wouldn't need more laws. So what's going to happen? The king's going to try to enforce the law. We get this beginning in verse 13. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, got all mad about it. That's nice. I'm glad to see him get all riled up. Maybe we'll get something done. Then you can get things done sometimes if you get them riled up, you know. Then in his rage and fury, he commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Bring those guys in here. What do you mean? They didn't bow down? Bring them in here. Tell them I want to see them. I want them right here. I want to look them right in the puss myself. Bring them in here. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Is it true? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I've set up. Is it true that you refuse to bow down to the golden image? Is it true that you refuse to worship the gods of Babylon? Evidently, the king had not had a close encounter with these three young men, although he had had such an encounter with Daniel. Now he's asking them point blank, is it true that you are rebelling against order? You're refusing to carry out my laws. Verse 15. Now, if ye be ready, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, when you're ready, when you hear the sound of all of this music, the middle of verse 15, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, if you do that, that's good. That's okay. Fine. Middle of verse 15. But if you worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? He's giving them a chance. In a sense, he's being fair with them. He's saying, now if you do it, everything's fine. You can have the weekend off. But if you don't do it, in the furnace, commanded to worship the image, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to be interesting. At this point, I would say 99% of America would fall down and worship the image. You may not know this, you may not really believe it, but these are the conditions which are going to exist on the earth after the church is translated in the reign of Antichrist. If you don't believe it, go down to the library, borrow a copy of Fox's Book of Martyrs. Or go down to the bookstore and for $2.98 or $3.98, along in that price range, buy yourself a paperback of Fox's Book of Martyrs and see what they did to the church in the first centuries. Boiled them in oil, put them on stretching machines, punched their eyes out and made slaves out of them. All kinds of things. You can't begin to think of the atrocities that have been committed upon human beings by other human beings. It's going to happen all over again. So the king is saying, you boys do what I tell you, everything's all right. If you don't, you're going to force me. Because at a certain point, the ruler has to protect his integrity. Because if he lets a little peon in his kingdom push him around, well, then he doesn't have any more say-so. Everybody else will be pushing him around. So he's got to carry this thing out to the hilt. So what's he going to do? Verses 13 through 23, they're going to refuse. We'll see what happens. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king. I'm glad they were listening, so they knew what to say. And they answered and said, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. What are they meaning? We are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Well, they're careful that they answer the king and how confident they were that their God was able to deliver them from the king. In other words, they're saying that we're not saying this in haste, but what we're saying, we're confident that our God can deliver us. Verse 16, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter, if it be so, verse 17, if it be so. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. In other words, If necessary, God will deliver us. Now, if God doesn't deliver us, verse 18, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. God will deliver us on one hand. On the other hand, we won't worship your image. We won't have any part in it. You know, when you get 2 or 3 guys, you're dealing with them and they're completely opposite of what you're trying to put over, it throws a monkey wrench in your works. And here's this powerful king, the most famous kingdom on the face of the earth. The Bible says wherever the birds flew and sheltered in the trees, or the animals were in the shade of the trees, wherever man trod the face of the earth, the kingdom of Babylon extended. And here's this powerful king being backed up in a corner by 3 little Jews. Amazing, isn't it? No, these 3 little Jews said, we ain't going to do it. Of course, they said it in Hebrew, you know. We ain't going to do it. All right. What's going to happen? All right. Verse 19. We're going to see what happens. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury. Well, he got mad down here in verse 13. Now the old fellow's going to get mad in verse 19 again. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury. He just got like a bull in a china shop. Full of fury. And the form of his visage was changed. He even got red in the face, and the blood rushed to his ears, you know, and he clenched his fist. And the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore, he spake and he commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was ever heated. He just threatened them with 1 furnace heat. When he first threatened them, they had the thermostat set at 400. Now he says, turn it up to 2,800. 7 times hotter. I'm sick and tired of these 3 little Jews pushing me around. I'll show them who's boss. Heat the furnace 7 times hotter. Verse 20. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind. I don't know why he's going to bind them. Bind them. He must have tied their hands behind them and their legs so they couldn't run or get away. Bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Verse 20. And to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. 21. Then these men were bound in their coats. Their hosen. This word hosen is an obsolete translation. It doesn't have any bearing whatsoever. It means an outer garment. And don't get the idea that they had woolen hose on. It doesn't really mean that. Somewhere in the translation they lost something. Their outer garments, they wore sort of a tunic type garment, like they wear today, some of the people over there. So their hosen and their hats, the middle of verse 21, and their other garments were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And he said, I'll show them. I'll show them. Verse 22. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, his temper was about as hot as a furnace. And the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men which took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In other words, the fellows who were going to throw these fellows in like stove wood. You've ever been back on the farm when you got the old potbelly stove really hot, you know, and you finally get the door open. It's too hot to get close to it, so you just toss the wood in, hoping that it goes through the opening. And you take your foot and close the door, and you burn the soles of your shoe, and your mother just raises Cain with you. My dad used to say, what is that smell? Well, I just burnt my shoes on the old potbelly stove, getting the door shut. See? So as they threw these guys in, all of those fellas died. Why? The flames leaped out and cut off the oxygen. They smothered. They burned. They died. They asphyxiated Right there on the spot. They died. And he threw the 3 little Jews in the furnace. Boy, this is something. Hollywood's never done anything with this. I don't know where they've been all of my life. Cast into the burning furnace. In verse, they slew the fellows who did it in 22, verse 23. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound, in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. The marvel of this is, God's going to get all the glory. God is going to magnify Himself. God uses even the wicked men of this world to magnify Him. So here's this powerful king is going to show off in his rage and in his fury, and amidst all of these multiplied thousands of people who have come to this dedication ceremony. Now they've come to a cookout. And they're all gathered around to watch the thing take place. And so they toss the meat in the oven. What happens? They fall down. They're still tied. Didn't even burn the cords. It's beautiful. God's going to get the glory. The king becomes amazed, beginning in verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished. Stoned, it says here. Amazed. Astonished. And he rose up in haste. And he spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Evidently the king must have looked in the furnace. He was so mad at these 3 little Jews, I think he went right up as close as he could get without getting killed from the heat of the furnace. And he looks in there, and he's, didn't we put 3 in there? Didn't we throw 3 in? Was that what we threw in 3? You didn't throw in a 4th one, did you? By mistake? You just put 3. Okay, what does he say? They answered and said unto the king, True, just 3, king. We just put 3 in, 4, 25. He answered and said, the king did, Lo, I see 4 men. Loose. Aha. God took the handcuffs off of them. God released them. I see 4 men. You threw 3 in. Now I see 4. That's enough to give him further problems. He'll need a pacemaker after that. Threw 3 in, and 3's become 4. What does he say about them? I see 4 men in the middle of verse 25, walking in the midst of the fire. There's 4 fellas in there, just sort of walking around looking for 31 flavor ice cream store. And they have no hurt. They're not burnt. They don't seem to be sweating. No, nothing seems to. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Now, I've heard preachers preach that this was Jesus Christ in there walking around with them. But that isn't what the Bible infers in any way, because Nebuchadnezzar would never have known about Jesus Christ of the New Testament. And this is further confirmed in one of the other verses, because when you go over to verse 28, and we'll just take a quick look at verse 28, and then we'll go back to verse 25, because when you look at verse 28, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel. Who has sent his angel. God's children have guardian angels. You remember on one occasion Satan said, Jump off the temple. It's written that the angels will bear you up. The angels won't let you fall to the pavement. You won't get hurt. Go ahead and jump off. Give us a display. But Christ would have been exerting his own physical ego under those circumstances, and he wouldn't do it. So we have guardian angels. Those 3 Hebrew young men had guardian angels. God put an angel in there with them because God is going to be magnified. I see 4 men, verse 25, loose. That's a victory. Loose. Walking in the midst of the fire. and they have no hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. So the king was amazed. Quick transformation. This happened within the space of just a few moments. Couldn't have been over 5 or 10 minutes. Not over 15 or 20 at the very longest. Because evidently the king is there while all of this is going on. And he looks into the furnace. He asks the question, are you sure you only put 3 in? Yes. Well, how come we got 4 in there? This fourth one looks like an angel. It looks like a divine being. If necessary, God will send divine beings to support His people. We have documented proof that God has done this on numerous occasions. God does all kinds of peculiar things. And out of them, He gets the honor and the glory. God has to be magnified. That's why it's so necessary in our own individual lives that everything we do, that God gets the preeminence. That we in no wise try to crowd some of the honor or the glory or the laurels or the commendations to ourselves. It must be that God gets the glory. God's going to get the glory in this circumstance because the king becomes really convinced beginning in verse 26. He really becomes convinced. In verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar, he sees 4 in the furnace, came near to the mouth. He wants to get a closer look. Came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and he spake, and he said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God. Now he's talking about a higher being. In their temple of Baal, B-E-L, in Babylon, where they worshiped their pagan god, the god of Baal, now he's changing his tune. He knows that that pagan god, Baal, and he knows that this gold statue, 90 feet high, standing there on the plains of Dura, can't do what he has just seen demonstrated. So he says now, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. They just walked out. Can you imagine what happened to those thousands of people? How they screamed and they fell over each other. You talk about panic. You talk about panic hardware on the doors. They sure had to have it on that whole field that day. They ran all over everybody. Getting out of here come these 3 guys right out of the furnace. Amazing. I wish I could have been there. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire, and the princes, governors, captains, the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, magnifying God. Proof that it happened. Hundreds of fellows saw it. They saw these 4 miraculous things take place. 1, the bodies were immune to fire. If God says don't burn, it doesn't burn. 2, no hair of their head was singed. If you just reach across to the back burner of the stove, now you burn the hair on the bottom of your arm. Not a hair on their body was singed. 3, their garments were not burned. And 4, no smell of smoke was upon them. 4 miracles. Saw these men, upon whose body the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, their woolen garments or whatever it was probably woolen garments. Might have been cotton. Woolen garments, the garments were not singed in any way, not changed in any way. No hair was singed, nor the smell of fire had passed on. They must have gone up and, no, I don't smell a thing. Reminds me of the little girl that came to Sunday school. And before she came, she emptied her mother's perfume bottle all over her. And she was so proud of it, that she had Mama's perfume on. And she got in the Sunday school class and nobody paid any attention, And finally she said, if any of you smell a smell, it's me. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, oh, bless the Lord, his old boy's getting converted. He's having a change of heart. This is beautiful. He was as stony as they come to start with. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel, not the Son of God, but has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. They opposed the king's word. There comes a time, maybe in our lives, where we have to say no to the authorities. Where we have to say, no, God comes first. And that may happen in some of our lifetimes. There may come a time in some of our lives, not all of us may be able to stand up under the pressure. But there may come a time when we will have to say to the authorities, no, I will not. God comes first. Some of the apostles did that. Early church fathers did that. Men are doing it today. And it's going to get tougher as we go on down the road of life, waiting for the coming of the Lord. But this old boy got converted. He was convinced that he was wrong. Now we look at the closing two verses. Nebuchadnezzar issues an official executive order that clarifies the thing, beginning in verse 29. Therefore, I make a decree. In other words, I'm going to pass another law. Sounds like Sacramento to me. Therefore, I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss, anybody that says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be fined no less than $50. No, it doesn't say that. Shall be cut in pieces. He's tough. This guy really got tough. He said, we'll just cut him up in little pieces, feed him to the dogs. That's what they did. Scavenger dogs running all over the place. They just they were going to cut them up and feed them to the dogs. They shall be cut in pieces, and their houses, their property, shall be made a dunghill or a waste, garbage heap, because there is no other God that can deliver after this fashion. No God can do what we've seen demonstrated. No God can protect 3 men thrown into a furnace that's been heated 7 times hotter than it was ever heated. Nobody can do that except a supernatural God. And anybody that says anything against that God from now on will destroy their body and absolutely obliterate all their property. Verse 30. Then the king promoted. They already had one promotion. He got one promotion over in verse 49 of chapter 2. That's an awful way to get a pay raise, I'll tell you that. To go through all that. But in verse 49 they got a raise. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So Daniel went interceded for them after the big image that the king saw in his dream. So he got the 3 boys a better job, and Daniel took a softer, a front desk job. He sat in the king's in the gate of the king. Now they're going to get another promotion. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Isn't that lovely? It's beautiful. And what do I get out of all of that? I come out of a lesson like that determined, regardless of anything, to put God first. God comes first. He has to. He must. When we put God first under these circumstances, it proves that we love Him. We love Him. And we love Him to what degree? Do we, on a scale of 10, do we love Him 2, or 4, or 6, or 8, or 9? We're supposed to love Him the top of the scale, 10. And our actions prove how much we love Him. That's what it's all about. That's what the Christian life is all about.
You have heard Dr. Estep deliver the third Bible study lecture from the book of Daniel, covering chapter 3. For a continuation of this Bible study series, please listen to the message on the other side of the cassette.